I'm going to go ahead and get started here. We'll be sending around the recording for folks who joined later when were unable to attend. But hello and welcome to our June webinar on templates and workflows on Civis Platform. I'm Owen Harrington Woodard. I'm a senior solutions architect here at Civis. So you'll find our Q&A tool under the 9 dots in the bottom right. So if you have questions as we're going along, please leave them there, and we'll have a Q&A period at the end to go over any questions that folks have. Just to sort of set the stage here a little bit, I want to level set on what Civis Platform is, since we'll be looking at that today. Our demo, and Civis Platform is an all-in-one data analytics stack from data ingestion and warehousing, security and governance, and AI-powered analytics, and visualization out of the box. I think most folks here already know us, so I won't spend too long there. And then in terms of what we're actually going to cover today, we're going to start out with script templates first, and we'll talk about what they are and why we think you should use them. Civis leverages templates really heavily, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Then we're going to look at workflows on Civis Platform. So how you can chain together multiple different tasks to accomplish some outcome, look at creating, executing, and monitoring those. And then lastly, we're going to kind of put those first two sections together and talk about templated workflows and how you can shift from building templates as an end state to thinking of templates more as a building block and the more complex workflow as the end goal. And then at the end, we'll have some time for Q&A. So the reasons to use script templates really fall into these 3 buckets here. So the first is automation. As it's maybe implied, templates make your processes repeatable, and they make it easier for your end users and more reliable overall. As I mentioned, we use script templates really heavily here at Civis. Most of our Civis data integrations are a script template that we have shared publicly, and the only feature that we're leveraging there, which is not necessarily available to every end user, is that we can make script templates public for everyone. But other than that, all the same functionality is available to you and your organization when you're building on Civis. One really common one that we see are SQL transformations, whether this is an export that needs to be updated with what date to look back to, or it's some kind of transformation where you want to run the same process against 2 different schemas or against 2 different tables. And other than that, everything is exactly the same. And the last one, which we're going to see an example of later today, are project setup scripts. So this is going to be the templated workflow, something that can take some arguments and build out an entire automated pipeline based on the information that you've provided. The next reason to use templates is sharing. Essentially, the data team or your data engineers or whoever it is can write the script template, and then they're able to share it. And folks don't have access to the underlying code. They can't make changes. So it's a safe way of sharing that repeatable code with the rest of your team while making sure that you've maintained security around the source code and around who can make changes and that sort of thing. And then lastly is maintenance. Having your scripts templatized means that if you are, as I mentioned, running the same SQL transformation against 4 different tables in 4 different schemas, and otherwise the transformation is exactly the same, if you didn't have that templatized and you found a bug, you'd need to go through and change all 4 of those scripts Whereas with a templatized solution, you can go and change just what we call the backing script, and then all of those, all everywhere that you're using that template will inherit that change automatically. So it makes maintenance much easier in the long term. So this is a graphic that I like to use a lot. It shows sort of the life cycle of the script template. And I think it's a really helpful conceptual tool for understanding how script templates work. So as I mentioned, you have the backing script. So this is where the code lives. This is where the logic lives. This is written by the data team. And then once the backing script has been published as a template, it can be shared out with other folks at the organization. And from there, they can then create their own custom scripts. So these are the dependent objects that I was talking about earlier. And let's say they create and run their own scripts. One of them discovers a bug, and they report it to the team. The team can go and fix that in the backing script, and all of those changes flow downstream automatically. So this is true not just for bug fixes, but also for adding additional features or any changes that are made to the backing script. You can add a new parameter or a new argument, and that will also be present downstream in the custom scripts. So that you may hear me use the terms backing script, template, and custom scripts. The backing script is where the code lives. The template is basically a pointer, a shareable pointer that points back to the backing script, and then custom scripts are what the end users create from the template. We'll talk a lot about parameters in your code. That's what really drives script templates. So that's going to be the pieces of information that your end users are supplying. And they're going to work slightly differently depending on what language you're working in. So I have that up here, and we'll be sending these slides around after the presentation. And this is also in our documentation as well, but just know that you're going to be accessing different parameters slightly differently depending on what kind of script that you're using. So now I'm going to hop into a demo and show you how to take a existing script and modify it and make a template. So switch my screen here. So I have a folder here in Civis Platform with a few different objects. I'm going to be coming back to these throughout the rest of the demos as well. So just to set the stage a little bit here, the persona that I'm using for these demos would be an analyst at an agency. So they have a lot of repeatable deliverables. They might be delivering this exact same report to different clients. The data is going to look very similar. It might just look in different, it might just live in different schemas. So we'll see how a repeatable deliverable can be templatized throughout the course of all of these demos. But to get started, I have a transformation script here. And as you can see, it's really ripe for templatizing because I'm already declaring some of these variables up here. So this can easily be swapped out with user-defined variables. And oftentimes we see things like this where you're already using the code in a semi-templated way because let's say you have repository of scripts and you clone the one that you need and you just update these values up at the top. We're going to take that a step further and show how that can be fully templatized in Civis Platform. So the first thing to do here is just add all these parameters. So basically, I'm going to take each of these things that I've got here, and I'm going to add them as a parameter. Some of them are going to be required, some of them aren't going to be required. The main thing to think about when you want to templatize your scripts are what are all the decisions that the end user needs to make? What are all of the pieces of information that they need to supply? What are the different things that change every time as compared to the things that stay exactly the same every time? You can also give this some really helpful input text that's going to help your end users. So I'm going to be nice here and say, give them, we're going to do it just for this first one for the purposes of demonstration. And then for the rest, in the interest of time, I'm just going to add them without nice display names and helper text. But so I can go ahead and add that. I need to add another parameter for my raw schema. That's going to be required. I need to know analytics schema. So this transformation is going to pull data out of the raw schema and deposit it into the analytics schema here. But these are all string types so far. And then the last one that I'm going to add is a database type. So this database 2 dropdowns is going to let me pick a database and then a credential that goes along with it. So make this required as well. So all of these are required in this use case, but they won't always be. And then now when I save these, I've got these input boxes here, just like you'd see in a script template. And I can go ahead and pick the Civis database, and then I know I want that credential. One thing I want to show you here with the database type in particular is that because there's multiple different values, right? The credential has a username and a password. The database has an ID, it has a name, it has a URL, a host URL, and some ports. So some credential types will have multiple different values available, and you can expand that with this parrot here. So I know that I want the database credential ID here. And now I'm going to take my arguments here, move them up here. And now I'm going to access that as an environmental variable this way. So just in the interest of time here, I'm not going to change these last two over, but hopefully you can see the idea. So it's really just about changing the dynamic from everything being static in your code to reading these different values here. So before I publish this, I'm going to go ahead and rerun it just to make sure that everything goes okay here. Could just take a minute. And I'm going to go ahead and publish it while we're waiting for that, but just to show that it should come back. So now under publish, I can go ahead and turn this on and then click save. And now I've got this template here. So this is the template. This is the pointer that points back to this backing script. And you can see I've got this section up here about how it's going to inherit all these changes. And since I have permission, I'm breadcrumbed back to the backing script. From there, if I want to give it to other users, I can go ahead and use the Civis sharing, just like you would in other Civis objects. So I'm going to find myself and go ahead and add myself shared here. And then this is almost done here. And it would have thrown an error already if it was going to. Yep. Okay. So it just finished up. And now essentially it's doing this is just a copy, and this because for simplicity in the demo, but you can see it's doing the same transformation that it was before. And now that it's been templatized, I can go ahead and hit new custom script. And now all of the code is abstracted away from me. And as a user, I'm just asked to provide all of these different arguments. So that's kind of the quick version of how to build a template. It helps that I had some existing code that I was already using in a repeatable way. So it can be helpful to think about what code you're already repeating or using, the same code in very similar ways. So I'm going to stop presenting this for a minute and we'll go back to the slides. And we're going to talk about workflows next. So workflows, really the key is building reliable data pipelines and accomplishing some goal. So I'm going to build workflows in two different ways today during the demo. And essentially, you can build the workflow only with the graph and the info tabs. So just in a graphical user way. But workflows are also backed by code. They're code-based logical graphs, so they're backed by YAML. And we'll also see how YAML offers a little bit more power and customizability. So when you're building just with the graphical interface, you're going to be limited to using existing jobs or leveraging a template, creating more basic control flow logic. So you'll still be able to do branching and have on failure paths. So you can have a happy path and a failure path. And then workflow parameters you can only pass into templates. Once you move into YAML, you'll be able to create new Civis jobs directly in the YAML by writing source code directly in the YAML. You can do a little bit more advanced control flow. So you can do conditional task execution, which is something that could be a really big game changer for organizations. One really easy win that you can get, which is where I always encourage people to start with when they're intimidated by YAML, is you can add retries to your tasks. It's just a couple of lines of code. It's pretty simple. I'm going to show it a little later, and it can be a great way to get started with using YAML in your pipelines. And then similarly, you can pass workflow level parameters directly into the source code of any jobs that you've defined in YAML. And those are just the really big highlights that I see people adopting first. YAML is really flexible. This is built off of the open source workflow engine Mistral, and you've got full access to that functionality. Just similarly to the way we set the stage with some vocabulary for templates, I want to make sure that I'm, covering what all the different terms that I'll be using are. So we would call this whole box here the workflow for A, and then each of the individual nodes in the graph is going to be a task. Every task has a different action over here. So this one is just running an existing Civis job. And then in the history, you may hear me call them executions. That's the language that we use for workflows versus a run. So very similar to a job run and a workflow execution. We are going to look at some YAML today. So that graph and the YAML are one-to-one always. So the same objects are present here. So we have the whole workflow would be this, the text, and then a task is defined as, this sort of section here would be a task instead of, and then we have the action here. And then there's also the input. So that's one thing that's not really present on the graphical side, but there's more complex input in the YAML side. And then the way that you see here, all of the different tasks connected to each other, That's represented by these on success, on complete, on error sections here that we see. So with that background, I'm going to hop back into Civis Platform, and we're going to look at building out a workflow. So if I go back to my project here, essentially these would be all of the things that I have right now that I want to tie into a workflow. So I'm going to go to Tools, and I'm going to create a new workflow. I'm going to open this in a new tab. And then, so the first thing I need to do just to set the stage here, I've got 4 different SFTP imports. So I'm going to set those all up. And then I have that transformation step that we just implementized. And then I have a refresh for each of those 3 different dashboards. So we're going to set that all up in this new workflow. So I know that that's one of my tables here. Give it a descriptive name, and then I can search for this. So it should show up in a second. Maybe I have too many similarly named things here, so that's okay. I can take this job ID, and now it's found that directly there. So I need to create 3 more. Yeah. And I'm going to drag in these to be connected so that when this task down here waits for all of these to complete first. That's now. So you want to make sure you're giving your task a good descriptive name, and then you can set it up like that. So I connected all of these this way with the drag and drop, but I can also change them over here with all of these parent and child conditions. So you can see I've got all of these set, but I could uncheck one of these and it would no longer be the parent here. So this is going to be the transform step. And then I'll demonstrate the connection piece. So I'm just going to create a free floating task over here that's refresh the report. Got the wrong thing. Sometimes just the job ID can help you out a little better. So I want this to run on success from the transform. So now I can find the transform and click that, and it configured it for me like that. And then all the YAML has been automatically updated. So again, this is one-to-one. And if I was to make a change on one side, it'll automatically be updated on the other side to show that. So now I've got all of these tied together. I'm not going to put all 3 of the reports in for right now, just in the interest of time, but I'll show you what that can look like really quickly. So I can go ahead and execute all of those. And then I want to give my workflow a good name. So And then in terms of automation, I can turn this on to automate on a daily, weekly, or monthly cadence. So if I wanted to run every day at 12 a.m. so that the data is fresh, I can go ahead and do that. The other thing that I want to call out here is notifications. So by default, you're going to get both a success and a failure notification. Failure notifications can be configured to send to multiple different addresses. One really common way that we see folks integrating those are with like Slack integrations with email or Teams integrations with email. You're able to add a Slack email address into this section here, and your team gets notified if their workflow doesn't finish. And then success notifications help your team stay in the loop about the status of your pipelines. One thing I want to show here as well is, let's say this report doesn't refresh. There's some issue with it. Let's build in a safety, an on error mode, so that if there's any problem with the refresh, we're just going to send out a CSV of the same data that's in the report so that the stakeholders get an updated version of the data. There's other ways that you can handle errors. You can always set an on error path here for any of your jobs. So there's easy ways to be able to make sure that you're handling errors gracefully. You're notifying team members if something is not running as it should. So in my project here, I have this CSV fallback export. So I'm going to set that up. And now if anything happens when this is running, where that fails, it'll send me a CSV, and that'll also be one of the ways that I know maybe that this failed. So we can take a look at this execution here. So all of these finished successfully as well. And while this is running, I want to show one other thing here, which is that you can run a workflow within a workflow. So, let's say you want to be able to compartmentalize this so that you can have an import workflow. Maybe you're going to add new tables to the import workflow. Maybe you're going to add other steps. And you want, the SFTP step to be sort of its own workflow. So I'm going to go ahead and take all of these steps here. And that's why, because it's expecting that. And then now in my new workflow, I'm going to just take out all of these on success blocks. And I should end up with all 4 of those. Oh, that's why. I overwrote too much. But now I have all of my imports here, and I can go ahead and take this workflow ID, and now I can do now I've got my imports. Those exist as their own thing, and it's going to run as a whole workflow that's nested within my other workflow. So it makes this pipeline look a little bit cleaner, and it abstracts some of the complexity of whether or not I want to change some of these imports in here. And we can see that this ran green here. One other piece that I want to show. So I mentioned, in the interest of time, not entering all of those different reports as new jobs, but there is a way with YAML to basically loop through all of those jobs. So those jobs are actually running in a template. So a template with a certain ID, and they take one argument, which is just the report ID. And so I have a list of reports here, and because I'm using with items, it's going to perform this action for each of these reports. So this is an easy way for me to keep my code drier, as in not repeating myself, and loop through all of those reports and create a refresh job for each of them. The last thing that I want to show just in workflows before I move into our final section is conditional control flow and using run outputs. So as I mentioned before, conditional control flow can be really powerful tool in your workflows. And essentially for each of your, on success, on complete, on error blocks, for each of the tasks within that, you can specify a true or false statement. And depending on how that statement is evaluated, the task will or will not be executed. So in this example here, the first task, and this is also an example of putting source code directly into the YAML. So this is a Python job. And you can see I've just defined this in pure Python here. The Python's running a little SQL as well, but I've been able to define it in Python. And so we're running really just a very simple count against the sum table, right? And so this is something that comes up a lot. How do I make sure my workflow doesn't run if this table is empty, because it's going to throw an error? This is how you do that. So, and we have a public example on how to post run outputs in your jobs as well that I can direct everyone to make sure that that's included in the materials that are sent out after this. But essentially, this first job is going to check how many records are in a table, and it's going to post that as a run output and as a workflow variable. And then the second job is going to only run if there's more than 400 records in the table. So that's a really easy way, and I can show you here in this execution. So this output that number of row count, and then this one ran because there was that number of row count. So that's how you're able to pass values between different tasks in your workflow. So I don't have any slides here, but I just want to pause to set the stage a little bit about templated workflows and around really thinking of templates as the building blocks. So one of the things you might have noticed in the demo earlier is that we had all of those SFTP imports. And if I was to go through and look at all of those, most of the information in them is exactly the same. So the directory that they're pulling from, the schema that they're writing to, the credentials that they're using, all of those things are consistent across all of those different templates, templated imports. And so when you're thinking about building a templated workflow, similar to what I said about just regular templates earlier, you really want to step back and think about what are all of the decisions that a user needs to make, or what are all of the pieces of information that your user has to provide to get from all the way from the beginning of your process through the end and through to your completed workflow. So we're going to see a way that we can do that with some of the same processes that we've been executing for the rest of this demo. So I'm going to hop back into platform. And what I've done is gone ahead and written a script template that is going um, to do all of those setup steps, right? So we can see maybe in this example, I had to manually create all of these. You can see in the database, we've got the raw and analytics schemas. I created those myself when I was setting all of these objects up. And the imports won't work if the schema is not there. So, but because most of the information is the same across all of those different objects, I'm able to sort of take a step back and think about, okay, what information do I need to do this from start to finish? So, as I mentioned, there's a SFTP directory where we know the client is going to provide their data. There's certain file names that we're expecting that are going to become table names down once they're imported. So I've got this all set up. We've got some of those templated reports. They're just going to get one in this example. And I can go ahead and run this. And what we should get are a few things. We should get a new schema. We should get two new schemas once the workflow is all completed. And we should get a workflow that does all of the same things that I set up. But you saw how long that took me to demo just now. And this script is going to take maybe 30 seconds and set up everything that I was just manually creating myself. Maybe a little longer than 30 seconds, but it should be ready to go soon. And then we'll get that workflow and we'll be able to execute that workflow end to end. You also could, this setup script doesn't do it just because this is, demo data, but you could set this up to automate the pipeline so that it runs every day. So this went ahead and finished. It should log the workflow ID for me here in a minute. But if I refresh this page, we'll see we've already got that new raw schema. So the script set that up successfully. And then so we've got the workflow ID. It created these different scripts and it's letting me know what those IDs are. I'm just going to go to my workflows. I'm going to find it. And now we can see this is the exact same thing that I got to with a lot more manual setup, but the setup process is automated, it's consistent, and it's reliable. So I can go ahead and execute this and it should run green. We're just about at the end of the time here that I had allotted. I left about 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. So I see that we don't have any questions yet, but if folks have questions on anything that I've shown here today or anything else to do with workflows, please go ahead and put those in, and I'd be happy to take a look at an answer. So we see one of the imports is finished already. So I see that table just the way that I would expect it to. And we can take a look at this script. You can see even the schema name is generated based off of the client name. So all of this can be deterministic and repeatable. And in general, templating out your workflows like this is going to just make things a lot more reliable. Are there any features that folks didn't know about that they think they might start using, or that you don't see in workflows that you'd like to see, or in templates? While this is running, just to give you some, sense of how complex a script like this is, um, it's a few hundred lines, not even 200. And so, it's leveraging our Civis Python client. I think we just did, I know we just did a webinar on the Civis Python client, and Civis has a very rich API. So basically, anything that you can do, clicking around via the user interface, you're able to script out. Um, and so that's how I'm able to, with just 150 lines, build a whole workflow based on some input information. All right. Well, the workflow ran green, and I don't see any questions coming through in the Q&A. So hopefully, folks aren't having any trouble with that. But I can give you a few minutes back here, and we'll be sending along the recording and the materials. And thank you so much for joining. And I hope you have a good rest of your day.